I think there are emerging technologies that are going to be even more disruptive, which again, I would say in post-COVID times, we want to take a look at. And indeed, talking about COVID itself is a very interesting study. What we do know is that the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, because of the work they had been doing with Nigerian schools of medicine and indeed medical facility, they were able to actually reference the whole of Nigeria. This was done originally for eradication of polio, which, as you would have heard 2 days ago, has now finally been eradicated throughout Nigeria, but also in terms of the tracing and tracking related to the Ebola pandemic in Liberia stroke Sierra Leone. With the use of, again, mobile phones, they were able to actually basically geolocate all of us in Nigeria. The geolocation of Nigeria is complete. So it's not just GIS, you've got geolocation and mapping. This means that, this meant that at the height of the Ebola epidemic, if you had Ebola and you were identified as having it, you could be tracked. And that, to a large extent, was able to stop the flow of Ebola from Liberia across to places like Nigeria. So in some ways, again, given, as we do know now, the politics of what's going on now, some of that tracing and tracking that we're talking about, we already have a lot of ability and both the technology and the knowledge to carry it out successfully. I would suggest that if you don't do it already, the World Service has a regular broadcast called Africa in Focus, or Focus on Africa. There was a very, very clear description from a Liberian doctor about how they do trace and track in Liberia. And to be honest, it would put certain governments, which shall remain nameless, to shame in the straightforward way in which it was being undertaken and how the community was involved and so on and so forth. So this is, again, the issue about the technology, especially when it's available, is something that does not necessarily have a location that is north-south. Often it's taking both the ideas and then sometimes applying those ideas to particular situations. And I would say in the case of West Africa, particularly nowadays, there seems to be a push towards thinking further outside the box. Having said so, there are still massive problems. We do know that testing or rather, it's not the testing now, it's more the track and trace works very well, but issues around how we can guarantee the testing and whether we have enough of the facilities in terms of ventilators and so on is still a problem. But some of the very basic problems, which I do think are actually technological and engineering focused, are things that we are quite able to work on and develop in a very successful fashion. So the idea, I guess the thesis I'm coming through with here is that it is important that we are able to utilize our understanding of these technologies. And by applying them, we can actually begin to think outside what I would call the standard box, which is, oh, well, we wait for the information to come from the north and then we apply it. Oftentimes, if we have the raw material, so to speak, we can actually begin to look at what is most appropriate and what actually, in some ways, better responds to our requirements in I would say particularly Africa. How do we incorporate these practices? Well, I think part of it is that we're looking both at the history of the past, but also we're looking to the future. So in no way am I saying that, when we're looking at thinking about technologies, we have to go right back to the historic and the cultural. Nobody's saying we have to go back to living in mud huts or anything like that. But what we are saying, or what I am saying, is that when we're looking at technology, we can actually begin to, I would say, both embrace it, but also create from it what is relevant to our needs. So at the top end, of course, we have our star architects. At the top is a concept shopping center by Sir David Ajayi, the architect. And at the bottom is the EcoBank headquarters, which is again by a Ghanaian architect, which has used, I guess, much more of the bottom particularly is using much more in standard, I guess, modern materials. But the conceptualization of the circle has the map of Africa on it, and it's oriented towards the north. So it's got this whole narrative around how it relates to its space in Ghana, which, as you might remember, is seen as a center of Africa because of its Pan-African credentials and so on. Whereas David Ajayi's building on the upper level is using things like wooden micro-cut wooden slats to, again, respond to the requirements for shading and so on and so forth. So in both these cases, there's been an embrace, I would say, of much more modern technologies, but it's been very much adopted and adapted to what might be relevant for Africa today.